In a nutshell, Hatem Bazian in the first piece, From Fast to Feast, criticized how Ramadan, from a month of fasting, has become literally a month of feasting, where people consume obscene and waste obscene amounts of food, and this at the detriment of poorer people in other parts of the world. In the second piece, Ramadan as a decolonial moment, people consume that much because Muslims have been colonized by Western and modern cultural frameworks. And because people are just sheep, then this is what produces inequalities, and this needs to stop. And Ramadan is the ideal time to reflect on these issues. Hello and welcome. Today I wanted to review with you two opinion pieces written by Palestinian-American professor Hatem Bazian. Most people know Hatem Bazian as being one of the founders of Zaytuna College, but in academic circles he is mostly known for being a pioneer at organizing academic events around the topics of Islamophobia, racism, and decolonization. So today I wanted to share with you two of his articles, his opinion pieces. The first is called From Fast to Feast. So you'll find the links to the pieces in the description of this video. So I'm not going to read everything, but select parts which I'll be commenting on. So the aim of this piece is to make a connection between Ramadan and the global poverty crisis. So he says, I quote, "In many locales, Ramadan has been transformed from a fast into feast with food overconsumption, waste, and nauseating levels of indulgence, and not to forget a month-long obscene entertainment agenda, which you have probably seen with all the charity fundraisers, which use all the possible celebrities you can imagine, and so on." So he says we need to feel that our overconsumption essentially is our own footprint on the lives of those living in poverty. Important to feel the hunger of the poor, but it is more critical to understand our own inward and outward responsibility for the state of imbalance in the world that today makes many go hungry on a daily basis. So it is completely fine for us to have a nice time, enjoy some nice food. But the problem is our actions have consequences. And these consequences mean that while we overindulge during Ramadan, some other people are not able to eat in some other parts of the world. Because our economies are connected. What we buy here goes into the pocket of some corporations, some brands that will distribute products which have been produced in faraway lands by exploited labor or sometimes forced labor, which means that the money we spend doesn't go into the pocket of the laborers and the workers that have been producing the food that we eat. So he says that fasting should be about reducing our footprint on the lives of the poor and collectively consuming less, so those who have nothing can have access to something. Many people just follow trends. Many people just do things because they've seen others doing the same, whether it is friends, whether it is families, and so on. So Hatem Bazian argues that the act of denying the self is the process of taking control of one's own life and beginning a journey towards purposeful living, which includes caring for others. He argues that Ramadan should be a time for reflection, for us to take control of our consumption habits and be aware of the choices we make and the consequences these choices have. He argues that Ramadan is about freeing us from the desires of daily life and focusing on the needs of the body and the soul. And the problem comes that we are living in a society that transforms desires into needs. We don't necessarily need the latest electronic like watches, phones, and stuff, but all the brands, all this consumption culture transform this into that these are things we need to survive in a way. So what should we do? He argues that Ramadan today must be about severing a relationship to products produced by corporations in sweatshops at far distant lands, using the poverty of people to maximize profit while treating them as modern wage slaves, including Muslim countries. If you think about it, some of these gym or fitness influencers who boast themselves of being Nike ambassadors, so you probably know that Nike hasn't had a good record for where it produces its clothes and how it pays the workers. So he argues that we come to a paradox where Muslims in Europe and North America end up drinking the blood of their own fellow Muslims on the other side of the globe, because people unconsciously consume and buy sportswear that may have led to the death of people in labor camps. The problem is that modern globalized capitalism is rooted in separation, alienation, with maximum profit for one party, the brands, and at the expense of all others. So in the article, he reminds us that we should see ourselves as custodians of the word, an allusion to the Quranic verse about us being Khalifa, stewards of the word. Nothing in the Quran, nothing in the Hadith says that we Muslims should contribute to the destruction of the word. It's completely the opposite. There's another thing that we consume on a daily basis, which is news, information we see on social media. So he goes further and says that Ramadan today means finding alternative to the destructive media that uses hate, racism, objectification of women, crude sexuality, and fear to distance people from one another and help foment wars near and far. So he is completely explicit. We should, during Ramadan, also fast from all these news feed, all the social media, and all these different modes of communication that at the end of the day spread and build harm. Ramadan today means a sincere and constant effort at ending all types of abuse and making sure that one has no role in any suffering of a human being near or far. And he concludes that we fast to control the self-desire, but it is far more critical to remove the harm we inflict on others. Ramadan is to live simply so others can simply live. Expanding on this perspective, he writes 2 years later in Ramadan, a decolonial centering moment. The problem is, why do Muslims, especially in Europe and America, but also all across the globe, are into this overconsumption culture? He argues that the problem is the contemporary modern Muslim world has been born and given a birth certificate with a colonial Eurocentric epistemic, which means Muslims all over the world has been colonized by modernity and all these different cultures emanating from the centers of power that come from Europe, North America, and so on, which have centered people's lives around material consumption and around secular values instead of God and a metaphysical reality. He argues that the paradox is that modernity is, he calls it, a double move process involving first a decentering of the past. We forget about the past. Our society becomes ahistorical. It forgets about history. And then it centers the present, while paying selective homage to an ancient event or set of events, but never allowing the ancients to enter into the conversation. Since the advent of social media, you've probably noticed how people inflate balloons, decorate their houses for Ramadan. Even London has the Ramadan lights. But how is our Ramadan truly connected to the essence of what Ramadan is, or the purpose of what the month is supposed to be? He argues that secularization basically transformed Ramadan into a Christmas where it becomes a month for consumerism. Just like in the Christian tradition, Christmas, from being the birth of Christ, has become just, an exchange of presents. Because he reminds us that to be modern is to be secular, capitalist, rational, industrial, and for sure disconnected, both in thought and action, from the halls of the ancients. So he argues that because Muslims globally have been colonized with this modern Eurocentric framework and have transformed Ramadan into this consumerist month, it is important to now recenter Islam, God, at the center of the month. So how does one do that? He says, a decolonial Ramadan involves committing oneself to a process of first cataloging the existing modern material mental inventory that originates in the colonial epistemic, meaning that we need to assess what in our daily life, what in our choices, our decisions, our thought process doesn't belong to Islam, what comes from this consumerist modern culture, what comes from these oppressive structures that are around us that have colonized our minds, what actions are godly and what actions are not. Second, he says that a decolonial Ramadan involves a commitment to navigate out of the racism deeply embedded in modern Muslims that are in an endless search to affirm its worthiness by means of physical and mental proximity to the superior whiteness. All these people who strive for wealth, fame, and power, taking selfies with elected members of parliament, politicians, celebrities, Muslims who fight to appear on TV, who fight for gaining as many followers as possible, as much wealth as possible. So he argues that this race for wealth, fame, and power is contradictory with what Islam is. Because lots of people still have this inferiority complex, and people need to prove to others that Islam is a valid religion and that they are valid human beings as Muslims. And I've touched upon the topic of acceptance and validation in many videos, and we know already that it leads nowhere. The more people try to be accepted, the less they're going to be accepted. Even if we see people in sports, on TV, in politics, it doesn't mean anything. Representation doesn't mean liberation. To conclude the article, he says that a decolonial Ramadan means a strive towards a real agenda for the mind centered on measuring our thoughts and actions by the metaphysical realities. And again, it's all about making the right decisions, knowing that in each word we say, every action we take, every decision we make, if they are a step forward towards a harmony, towards God in a way, or are they steps towards division, towards chaos, towards harm and oppression? In a nutshell, people around the globe are lost in this material culture where the dunya, the material, the physical world, takes precedence over the metaphysical reality, the hereafter. But the problem is, in a world where information is readily available, and we can find the source of the products we buy, we can look up the consequences of our actions. It's only a few clicks away, a few taps away on our phone. God is going to ask us after our death, well, you had all this information available. Why did you not look into it? Why did you not look at how the clothes you buy, the food you consume, caused death, caused harm to some other fellow Muslims, fellow believers at the other end of the globe, and you didn't do anything about it? And this is what, for Hatem Bazian and other thinkers, an Islamic decoloniality meaning to shed and fast from all these ungodly suggestions and behaviors and center our actions, our behaviors onto a godly behavior so we can be stewards, Khalifa of the word. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was helpful. And again, take care of each other and yourselves.